welcome to the King's Cup pre-show. This is Berto Burrito. He will be joining me on the cast. You probably recognize him already. If you don't, you should join his Discord. Follow him on Twitch. Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to say about yourself?
I play cards sometimes.
That about sums up all of us.
Yeah.
Alright, so, there is the link to the deck lists. I'll quickly run over the format again for the tournament, in case people have missed it. So, this tournament is a best of 9. You have to bring all 5 decks, no ban. Well, all decks from all 5 nations, no bans, and the ally nation has to be different for all 5 decks, no repeat allies. So it means if you want German-Italy control, you can't have Britain-Italy air, or vice versa. So it means we're getting some pretty interesting decks. You had to really think through your lineup, consider which decks you wanted to use with which minors, and the players submitted their decks last night, and they are pretty interesting. Berto's mic volume is a bit low compared to yours. Sure, I can turn that up. Just kidding, you're literally at max. I mean, you're fine for me, just speak louder.
Do you want to turn me up in Discord?
Yeah, that's what I mean, you're at max on Discord.
Oh. Yeah, that's a good point. Wait, I can turn up my mic volume in Discord, probably. Never mind, it's at max.
I mean, you're perfectly fine for me, so, let us know if he's still quiet. I can try fiddling around with my volume mixer. But, yeah. But before we get into the decks, I will say, well, how about we both go over what we were expecting, from deck lists before we go over what we got. So, personally, I was expecting to see 4 Japan-German Feigned Retreats, and, like, either 4 Britain-Italy heirs, or, like, 2 Britain-Italy heirs, 2 German-Italy controls. Like, I was expecting Italy Ally to be split exclusively between Britain-Italy and German-Italy, 4 Feigned Retreats, 4 self-damages, and then various forms of ramp for US is kind of what I was expecting.
And Soviet self-damage.
Yeah. What about you? What were you expecting?
I mean, I was expecting Jagro, Soviet self-damage, Britain, Italy air, US with either France minor or Polish minor.
And German-US Heinz, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's just like
because that's the way you have 4 played meta decks at a high level in the tournament. And then US Poland Legions is not bad, even if you don't see it too often. So I thought that was a pretty clear choice, at least for me, but I'm glad that not everybody thought so, because that makes it a lot more exciting.
Yeah. We have no deck which was brought by all 4 players. And actually only 1 deck which was brought by 3 players. Every single deck except for Soviet self-damage. We have 3 Soviet self-damage. Other than that, every single deck is brought by only 1 or 2 players. So we have quite a bit of variety. And even inside of those, there's quite a bit of card variety within the same decks. So let me just pull up the first player. We will start with Wild Eyes. Here we go. So, starting with Wild Eyes' Soviet deck, there's Soviet Japan self-damage. Is there anything to note about this version of it?
Let me take a look. It plays counteroffensive, which people are pretty split between choosing to play or not play. It definitely has a lot of potential, but it can hurt consistency a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Shinhodo, which can make some explosive plays with counteroffensive. Apart from that, it looks pretty standard. It's the sort of slower version where you run Naval Brigade and Engineer Battalion.
I actually think this is a card-for-card copy of my self-damage from the last OCC and Open. Now that I'm looking at it closer, yeah, 2 Sunrise Division, 2 Shinhodo. 2 copies
One
of
T80.
counteroffensive. Yeah, T80 is a weird one because, like, on its own it's really powerful, but you do have to wait for the destruction effect. So, I don't know, I've also thought of replacing T80 with the newly changed, 95th, I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just pretty standard self-damage. Then we get to his US deck. I will say right now, these images were made with the online deck builder, and they have not updated the skirmish cards, so this deck also includes 5th Rangers. I think 3 copies of 5th Rangers. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the deck list. Only 3 Shermans. That's
The
very interesting.
the other thing that's a little different than standard, I think, these days is running the 99s. Very, very powerful if you're ahead, but very scary to be on the back foot and have those stuck in your hand.
Yeah, and with 3 sudden strikes, this deck looks like it's just trying to 3 sudden strikes and 2 dive bombings. So it looks like he's really going all in on this Blitzkrieg win condition. Just get to the front line, and you don't need to hold it or exploit having the front line for a long period of time with only 3 Shermans and 2 weakened Dewitt's, but with 99th, no 22nd, but 2 Blitzkriegs, 99th infantry, and a whole bunch of orders to get to the front line. This is certainly a non-standard version of US German, but we also haven't seen US German in a while, so how do you think this is going to fare with the other decks we have?
Well, if this gets played into self-damage, I can tell you now he's going to have a bad time. But that's the case with any US mid-range deck. Particularly 30 seconds just suck so bad into self-damage. It is hard to watch. So hopefully we don't see that.
Do you think the triple sudden strike double dive bombing helps against self-damage at all? Because it can...
Not enough. Like, I mean, maybe. It maybe is a little bit better, and, you know, self-damage can always get a brick hand. It's anything's possible. But it is probably... I'd put it at, like, 9-1 odds.
Wow.
Based on my experience in the matchup.
Alright, well...
I think that the sudden strike and dive bombing is really huge against decks like Jagro, Air. So I think for those reasons, those tech choices are really good options.
Alright, let's move on to his third deck. It is Britain-Italy Air, the only Britain-Italy Air in the entire tournament. Yeah, what else is there to say about this deck? Looks...
ATS.
Oh, he's running the ATS version. He is, and that probably means he's running, yep, 3 copies of Sea Patrol. And Wellington, another Blitz card. So what did he actually take out to be able to fit this all in? He's taken out Mare Nostrum, he's taken out Gladiator. Not running Ultra, which is an interesting choice. I know some people don't feel... I feel pretty strongly that Ultra's not a great tournament choice card, and it's much better just on ladder. I still feel like he's just It feels like there's just more cards in here than on my Britain
Yeah,
Italy air
that's what I
deck.
was thinking. I looked through and I was like, I don't know what's missing. I just trusted you were gonna get it.
um, yeah, I actually can't figure it out. He still has Kitty Hawk. He still has Shelling, Mosquito, 4 copies of Close Air Support. I mean, yeah, actually, I'm just completely blanking on what. Oh, he's missing Paraseas. He took out
Oh, what
Parasy.
the? Oh,
That
okay, that's it.
I am very interested to see how that works out because Parasy on bombers is just so powerful. It's insane in the mirror. It's insane against control.
It
It's
looks like
really
Wild Eyes is going the lose against self-damage route, which is fine.
yeah.
You have 5 decks. You can just say, whatever, I lose to self-damage, it's going to take a win off me at some point, whatever. And I think that's completely reasonable.
Yeah. Do you think there's like any deck he's trying to target with his 3 decks so far?
I mean, he seems pretty good into Jaggro.
I'm gonna
Parasy is a card that you don't really care that much about, unless they have a turn 4 key.
yeah. Yeah, it's basically just kill key. I feel like so many decks into Jaggro, you just need that card that can answer key on turn 4, or else you just lose to key on turn 4, even if it only happens like 20-30% of the time.
It's fine, just go first and have Wrath.
Alright, then let's get to his 4th deck, his German deck. It is German US Heinz. Yeah, this, so far, Wild Eyes is following most closely what you suggested. He has the Heinz, he has the self-damage, he has the Brittly Air, but he has the US-German mid-range. So we will see his Japan deck, but it means he does not have Japan-German Fatal Retreat. But this Heinz deck, you know a lot more about Heinz than I do, so it looks pretty standard to me. Do you see any interesting choices in there?
Most people don't run half track.
Hmm.
So that's sort of tacked more against control, to be honest.
Triple Flam and double half track seems also really good into air.
Yeah, I'd say mainly it's into air. He has a little more longevity than most Heinz decks with his Panzer 3H, which a lot of people also don't run. I also don't run any Flam Panzers, and he's running 3. So, yeah, very hard deck against air, it looks like.
And these Heinz decks always have a deceptive amount of card draw. So he has 2 draw off the 22nd, well, potentially more, potentially less. But he has 2 22nds, which can draw 2 38Ts, which draw 1, 2 Martyrs, and 2 Panzer H's, plus the 2 draws off We Can Do It. So, yeah, this deck can definitely go the distance, which is probably what it's going to need into any sort of US midrange. Only 2 Blitzkriegs, though, so this is not quite the Noen style of just get all of the Blitz tanks to the front line and double Blitzkrieg your opponent. It is slightly more mid-range than that. Do you think a more mid-range version of Heinz is better or worse for this field?
That's a good question. I think most people are sort of aggro to mid-range with most of their decks, so I would prefer to try to be a little bit faster.
And
just to wrestle control of that front line early a little bit better.
he is lacking the dive bombings that a lot of other Heinz decks run, but the double half track also works on self damages, like resetting the cost on 34th, or sending back a massive 4, 5, 6th. So, yeah, we'll have to see how this deck works. And then, let's get to his 5th and final deck. It is Japan Soviet Aggro. Wow. Yeah, I think this is definitely one of the most surprising decks that I've seen of the tournament. Deciding to keep the German ally for U.S. German, which means he needs to do something else with Soviet or with Japan, and he picks Soviet ally, which, I mean, this is a very long time ago. Soviet ally was very common with Japan. The Katyushas with Type 93s were really good at controlling the early game. He is running the Feigned Retreat, he's running the 1 5-year plan, but he lacks the 35 Ts, which are very important to fight against air. He's lacking the Arados to guarantee to draw Feigned. Yeah,
I'm surprised he doesn't run in close combat.
Yeah.
Which is 2k to give your infantry +3 attack this turn. So I can't live the dream of go first bicycle regiment triple 554 for front line into top deck. Close combat win the game on turn 2.
Yeah.
Which I would have loved to see, you know.
He does. Something I am a little worried about is he lacks the he lacks any like big finishers, any big wombo combos. He doesn't even have Shiden in there. So I'm worried that if he doesn't hit his 5-year plan or Feigned Retreat, he's just gonna lose. However, his deck might be slightly faster with these 554th and 2nd Marines. It might be slightly faster just out of the gate than the Japan-German version. So I think he will have to harness that massive tempo lead with these zero operation cost blitz infantries. Either that or just keep Feigned Retreat off the opening mulligan, which I think is a perfectly fine strategy, assuming you're not going against discard.
Alternatively, he can lose to Winter Warfare on turn 1.
Yeah, this is another deck which is going to be very weakened to self-damage, I think. So, and again, as you said before, I think being weakened to self-damage is actually just fine. It's a hard deck to try to like hard counter with 5 decks, so if your opponent gets a free win with self-damage, but you're good into his other 4 decks, that's perfectly fine. Let me pull up our next player's decks, which is Vinny. Starting with his Britain deck. Now, this is not Britain, Italy, Air. This is Britain, Poland, Legions. This is a deck we have not seen in a long time. And he also has a few very interesting card choices in here, such as the Manchester 1A, which I believe is the first time I have ever seen this card run in a tournament.
That's the one that summons the 1/1? Protect it?
No, it's the one that puts precision bombing into your hand.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, it might be like a call out for self-damage. Like if you can get a big 6-attack bomber in the support line, like if you can stick it behind some legions, it attacks for 6 and it has the order to destroy an enemy. But I mean, slamming a 7-cost bomber against self-damage, there's a lot of steps between turn 1 and turn 7 that you have to survive. 2 copies of Supply Shortage. The deck builder is lying to us, it's 3 credits, not 2 credits. But still choosing to run Supply Shortage, which is interesting. 1 Uprising,
Yeah,
2 Carpet Bombings.
Pretty good card, at least when you are able to find your pin. Or if you just need like a little extra damage.
Yeah. And his deck is actually running a lot of intel cards. 3 copies of the 1K Orp, 2 copies of Agency Africa, 2 Karases, 2 copies of the 3K Orp, on top of just the normal underground states.
Why are you saying 1K and 3K Orp? Did you pronounce the names, James?
Orp Orzel and Orp Blazkavika.
Live you in the Polish language. Messed up. 1 Uprising is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it is always, it does feel like you really want like 13 or 14 Polish card slots when you try to build a Legions deck. So you have to make cuts somewhere. The one Pioneer and the one copy of Aerial Reconnaissance is going to be very useful for this deck since it's largely orders. It's very, very order heavy, and if you can get a couple of those intel cards down to 0, it can lead to some crazy pop-off turns with Tarnow. Yeah, I'm just very happy that we have like a control deck, basically. We saw at Wild Eyes' lineup, it was very aggressive and mid-range, and this is our first control deck of the tournament, which I'm not that surprised that Vinny's bringing it. I know Vinny is a fan of the Legions. I know he has played Britain Legions before, German Legions, I think Japan Legions. So yeah, hopefully this works out for him. Then we have a German deck. It is German US Heinz, same overall archetype as Wild Eyes, but this one is certainly different. There is some pretty key differences in here. 3 35Ts, so a lot of Heinz decks don't actually run 35T because they don't run a large number of one-cost infantry, in this case just 4, plus you could theoretically play turn 1 Greif into 35T. So it's not as consistent out of the gate, however, with those 2 Blitzkriegs, 2 cost, 0 up, Blitz tank to the front line is great with Blitzkrieg. There's the Yeg Bomber. I forget if Wild Eyes is running the Yeg Bomber, I don't believe so.
I think he is.
He is?
He's not running Enigma, though, which running a copy of Enigma is pretty standard in this list, but I think Wild Eyes maybe tried to make the read that Control wasn't going to be as popular, and that Enigma was not going to draw many cards.
And we actually do have the fast Heinz in the Heinz deck, which, yeah, it's been a long time since fast Heinz actually runs Heinz, but with, I mean, he has a lot of German tanks. He has the Beefs. He has the one copy of Red Devils, which I know is, I believe, something that, like, is a signature of your Heinz deck, is the one Red Devils. How similar is the rest of the deck to yours? Do you think he drew inspiration from you? Do you think it's just to help with the 35Ts?
Maybe a bit of both. He might have seen my list and thought, like, oh, I mean, if it's good enough for him to run 1 Red Devils, then, like, easy enough to put it in my deck if I want to put Panzer 35Ts in.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting to see how this one works out. Let's get on to his Japan deck. This is just Feigned Retreat. He is running the... He's actually running a version, which I think I've seen... I think it was some Chinese players first tested around, which is taking out Mitos altogether and putting in Shinhodos, with the idea being you don't get the guaranteed destruction effect to deal damage to the HQ. However, if it's later in the game, you have more credits, you can blitz and attack something in the support line, assuming it's not guarded. So it has its payoffs. It's better into air, it's better into most aggro and mid-range decks, but it can be significantly worse into control if they get some guards going. And no Feigned Retreat, he's running the AA gun instead of Feigned Retreat. So yeah.
What are you saying?
What?
It has Feigned Retreat.
Did I say no Feigned Retreat? No Enigma,
Yeah.
no Enigma is what I mean. Took out the Enigma for the AA gun. Yeah, this is a pretty standard list. We've seen Feigned evolve very, very slowly. Used to be 4 Mitos and Enigma, then we took out 2 Mitos for 2 Whirlwinds, and then we took out the Enigma for the AA gun, and now he's taken out the last 2 Mitos for the Shinhodos. Yeah, I mean, at least against Wild Eyes' deck, I think the Shinhodos will work better. So, hopefully, his opponent in round 1, which is Cappuccino, and whoever he plays in the second round, hopefully they're bringing some more similar decks to Wild Eyes and not Control. Then we have Self-Damage, number 2. And this is, again, a different version. of self-damage. This one's running the KV, which I think can just be game-ending in the mirror. He's running 3 copies of Sunrise, only 1 copy of Counteroffensive. So you have probably more experience on self-damage than I do. How do you feel this deck fares compared to Wild Eyes'? What do you think? Do you think it's like just better, just worse, better into different matchups?
Well, I find counteroffensive is most useful into control, so having 1 less copy might mean that he's a little better in the mirror matchup.
Mm-hmm.
Although it also means that there's more Winter Warfares running around, and sometimes your opponent might have to play Winter Warfare themselves. And then you can piggyback off of that with your own counteroffensive. I mean, obviously there's a whole lot of ways that things can go down. The SU is particularly good in the mirror matchup, and as you said, KV, it's good if you can get into a winning position, but a lot of the time, turn 4, 5, 6, you have to worry about 6/6s in the front line, and you just can't play KV in that situation. So I think if I was specifically going for the mirror matchup, I wouldn't play KV, but it certainly has its times that it shines.
Yeah. I mean, I think the benefit of KV is when your opponent brings themselves down to 10-8 health with their own cards, and then floods the support line with these very slow infantry. KV is essentially just guaranteed 4 damage at minimum then, and then if you can guard it up for just a turn or 2, it can just end games. It stops Sickle from being able to be played, makes a Yak essentially kill yourself. But yeah, it also doesn't do anything on play other than deal 2 damage at the start of your opponent's turn, and it essentially just gets eaten if any of those infantry are in the front line already.
I will say the most important difference is probably 3 Sunrise Division over 2.
Yeah.
Because there's not a lot of direct damage coming from this deck, except for if you run KV. So you're not even that scared to be at 10-2 life. So having the extra Sunrise Division as a 2-cost 9/9, especially when the main threats from your opponent are the 6/6s, is really big.
Yeah. Let's take a look at his US deck now. So because he used Germany for the Feigned Retreat Jagro, it means he could not do US-German midrange, and instead of going the route you mentioned at the beginning of the stream with US-Poland midrange or US-France midrange, he decided to just bring ramp. So this is US-Britain ramp with quite a few interesting tech cards in here. He's got the one of Bolster, 2 copies of the P-47, 2 We Can Do It's. He actually has United We Stands, War Machines, and 1 Milk Truck. But is missing out on a couple of the more expensive ramp cards. He's only running 2 War Bonds, no Hour of Need.
P-47D, I think, is particularly nice with this little meta that seems to be forming with a whole lot of mid-range. I think that's especially where P-47D shines.
Yeah. Avenger as well is... I mean, it's not great, because it usually will die this turn you play it, but against self-damage, it's another just 1-for-1 trading with one of their big guys. I do see...
Oh.
What?
Sorry. No Hellcats. How does that make you feel on a personal level?
I think Hellcats, you just need to put that into every single US deck you play. Well, certainly have a US main deck. The fact that people don't even run it in Heinz makes me a little sad. Yeah, it makes the deck, I think, weaker into air. I think it makes it weaker into... I mean, people are actually cutting KV. But back in the day, KV used to be way more popular. You'd throw it into, like, RD, you'd throw it into basically any Soviet aggro mid-range deck. And it could sometimes just savage ramp. Hellcat's also great into Heinz. I think the fact that he's cutting it in favor of more of these heavy-hitting units in the late game. Now the question I see is, can he get there? I feel like there's a very awkward point in his curve where he has the turn 2 War Machine and then 2 4-drops. Or he has the turn 3 War Machine or the turn 3 332nd Engineers, and then he has 2 War Bonds, and you probably don't want to weaken do it on turn 4. So I feel like he's going to have a weak couple turns, but once he can get up to 6 credits, that's when he's going to start slamming down the Gren Guards, the P-47Ds to catch up on board. Once he gets into carpet range, that's going to be pretty big against a lot of decks we've seen so far. And yeah, the one bolster is quite interesting, because he's not running Pershing, and he's not running the B-17F. And those are typically what I think of for bolster units. Obviously, you can still just play it on any of these units to op-cost your boy. And it's going to be fine. But let's... Oh, that is actually his 5th deck. Yeah, we've gone through all 5 of Vinny's decks. So, how do you feel...
Just roll Pershing off mass deployment every time. Easy.
Actually, it makes me... He does not run Seaborn Invasion. Which is pretty interesting. That's a card we typically see in basically every ramp deck. Between Vinny's and Wild Eyes' decks, they are not playing each other in the first round. They might not... Theoretically, they might not even play each other at all if one wins, one loses. But how do you feel about Vinny's style of some aggro, some mid-range, some control versus Wild Eyes' just much more aggressive lineup?
I mean, in tournaments, it's often nice to have a more consistent strategy so that, say, if you're all aggressive and your opponent has one ramp deck, then you can be favored in that matchup.
Mm-hmm.
But with all these restrictions, it's really hard to... You pretty much just at that point want to run the 5 best decks you can make.
Yeah.
With particular attention to your worst deck being not that bad in a Conquest format. And I think both players did pretty reasonable jobs at that.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't favor one much higher over another.
Yeah, I think there's... I'm quite enjoying so far the the variety we're seeing. That Japan-Soviet aggro deck from Wild Eyes is looking very spicy. Vinny, who you can usually count on to bring at least one deck you don't typically see, has this ramp deck. He has the Britain-Poland Legions. Now, who do you want to see the decks of next? We have Kolbasnik and Cappuccino.
Kappa.
Alright, let's...
I don't know, dude.
Well, I do not currently have Cappuccino's Chinese name on hand, so we're just going to do Cappuccino. Starting with Cappuccino's Britain deck. No, this is not still Vinny's deck. Cappuccino is also bringing Britain-Poland Legions. Yeah. Just put 4 players in a vacuum, tell them to bring decks with a handful of restrictions, and somehow they both pull up very, very different versions of the deck, mind you, but they both pull up Britain-Poland Legions. Which...
Yeah, the deck's nuts.
I mean, we have seen a lot of Britain decks. I think pretty inarguably, Britain has the access to the widest range of very, very powerful decks. And I must say, Britain-Poland is not one of the ones that comes to mind when I think of really, really strong British decks. But, I mean, they don't look bad, and these players probably have way more experience on Britain-Poland than I do, so I'm very interested to see what other ways Britain can be incredibly strong. So,
what's the Observer Corps for?
Vinny also had 2 Observer Cores. I think it's just you typically running a handful of expensive cards. Like, there's nothing... I don't think there's any one combo you want it with, but just like reducing like a Churchill down to 5 or like a Tarnow down to 3. So on turn 5 you can do Tarnow to Intel cards or something.
Where Churchill did not die.
Yeah, turn 5 Carpet Bomb sometimes. I mean, with a deck with so many cards that cost like 5 or more, if your opponent just like plays a turn 1 Observer Core, you have to play around so many things. Like turns 4 to 6, where it's like your opponent could easily have any of their 7 cost cards come out.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I've experienced that before. It's psychological warfare, to be honest. Like, oh, do I play around turn 5 Carpet or Churchill, Blackwatch?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, you can play Blackwatch, but it's another consideration. It's messed up.
Yeah, and he has the 1 evasive action. This is something that I've seen in a lot of Britain, Poland Legion stacks, is they just like find places for like these really cheap countermeasures. We saw Vinny with the aerial reconnaissance, 1 copy. Cappuccino deciding to go for the evasive action. And I mean, a well-placed evasive action can just end the game in certain matchups.
Like if your opponent plays an SU.
I mean, it actually stops Sunrise Division from getting the +6/+6.
Yeah.
It's typically not great into self-damage, but
There could be a lot of funny moments.
yeah, and I mean, US midrange, we've seen 1 so far from Wild Eyes. So, and if this hits like a Sherman on turn 4 or turn 5 and they went first, I mean, that can just be enough to lock out games.
Especially if they run Breeze Germans.
That is true. If I'm Wild Eyes, I do not want to bring my midrange deck into this deck. Something that actually the same as Vinny is he's running the 1 fortification with the 3 copies of the 3K Orb. I'm not going to try to pronounce that again. This is very odd to me, because they're not running Commonwealth. I mean, I wouldn't expect them to run Commonwealth, they just don't run that much healing. But I find it interesting that both feel the need for just a little extra healing.
I'm surprised by the lack of a second Tarnow regiment, because I feel like that's the best card in the deck.
I mean, he isn't running the 1K Intel cards, the 1K Orbs, Orb Rizal, like Vinny is. So it looks like he's more running Poland as, instead of as the main win condition of the deck, as like a powerful like synergy package inside the deck. He's running the 2 copies of the Uprising. He does have the Lancaster, Churchill, and His Majesty's Chosen to get another big British plane. Or big British elite. Typically it's going to be a plane, let's be honest. So yeah, it doesn't look like he's going for as much as a Tarnow as the main win condition. And I guess that makes sense with not running the aerial reconnaissance then. You don't need to discount these cheap intel cards. Yeah, I mean, this deck, I feel like it can be weak in the beginning turns. I mean, if you hit like double Plan West or something into an early Uprising, sometimes you just win the game. Like if you do turn 3 Plan West, turn 4 Plan West, turn 5 deal 4 damage to all units to essentially clear the board, you're almost certainly going to win.
What I'm hoping for is somebody just keeps playing a big unit and they play triple Underground State, double Wrath Lightning.
Oh, we've all been there. Don't forget the Churchill at the end of it.
Alright, shall we move to the next deck?
Yeah. Next deck is not German US Heinz, it is German Britain Combined Arms. This deck goes by a lot of names. It's the Hummer deck, it's the High Roll deck. Very interestingly though, he is running 2 copies of Dive Bombing and not running Comet. So
a little more of a board control idea.
Yeah, I think this is... I mean, Comet is really bad if you're running into a lot of guards. So it's possible that he predicted there was going to be a lot of guards. It's also possible this dive bombing seems like it's a bit of a call-out for the new Italy guard that just got released. But yeah, I'm very curious to see how this works out. Not running Comet. I think Comet's one of the best cards in the game. So I'm initially skeptical. He's also running a little less draw than most decks. He's not running the Martyr and then only one copy of the Enigma and Panzer H. But that's also allowed him.
You're also biased and wrong, so whatever.
Yeah, I mean the dive bombings will certainly help against a deck trying to kill your Hummers or other buffed tanks with units. If you're playing against something like an order heavy control deck, that's just going to be using orders to remove your tanks every turn, I think you're going to really miss the Comet. But, I mean, so far, there's a lot more unit-based decks and unit-based removals and trading strategies, I think, than typical, so maybe this is actually just a correct call-out of this particular tournament meta.
I mean, you say he thinks he's gonna miss the Comet a lot. I think you don't get to turn 6 most of the time on this deck. Like, you can switch a few cards and it might be wrong, but you're still playing CA, and your win condition is still pretty similar.
I mean, yeah, in a best of 9 format, like, this deck is just going to absolutely kill your opponent no matter what they play, like 30% of the time, and then the other, on top of that, you're just going to have normal games that you may or may not win. So yeah, I don't think this is a deck that can ever be targeted, that's going to lose like 5 times in a row to lose you a tournament set. CA just, it's eventually going to get the God Hand. But let's see what other decks he has to win with. We have a second version of Japan-German Feigned Retreat, also missing the Enigma. However, this one does not have the Shinhodos. It's up to 3 Mitos, 3 Akitas. That's interesting. Yeah, I guess in a format where your opponent can only run 1 Italy ally, Burn is safer to go for. It also potentially makes it better into self-damage, I think.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
Yeah, and then other than that, I think that's basically the one change from the main tournament Feigned Retreat we've seen in and day in, day out. I think the -1 Akita +1 Mito is the only change I can see. But I mean, Feigned Retreat, this is just another aggro deck where you might beat it once, you might even beat it twice. Are you ever going to beat this deck 3 times in a row? And last but not least, we have our third version of self-damage, and this one is pretty spicy. This is definitely the most different we've seen.
Utsunomiya!
Yeah, we got the one copy of the Utsunomiya regiment. I don't think anyone knows that by name. I certainly don't. It's the 5-cost 4/6 infantry Japan has that deals 2 damage to the enemy HQ when they play an order. I think this is going to be targeting the mirror. It's similar, and he also has the KV. So I think his strategy in the mirror is not run more Sunrise Divisions. He's actually not running any Sunrise Divisions. I just realized that. This is a very different take on self-damage. He also has the Petliakov.
Gree, lesser of 2 evils. That's whack.
Yeah. Also, don't believe this curve. This 95th Rifles is 2 cost now. So his curve is slightly less steep than it appears here. He's running Road to Berlin and 329th. Yeah, and 1 copy of Counteroffensive, 1 copy of Ura. This looks like almost more of a burn heavy deck than the typical board control deck.
Road to Berlin is also really funny in the mirror matchup because it can trigger on your opponent's turn just from them playing a single Red Dawn or a few other self-damage cards in SEU on the 99th.
And
95th, I mean.
Typically, that can actually be a disadvantage because it stops you getting out your Sunrise divisions. But not only does he not run Sunrise divisions, he runs these Petliakovs, which stop the opponent's Sunrise divisions. Yeah, I think this... I really want to see a mirror matchup, a self-damage mirror matchup, with this being one of the decks.
Also, less vulnerable to something like air that has burst potential.
Yeah, that is also true.
Yeah, without Sunrise. Anyway, sorry, you can move on.
Yep, going to the last deck. And it is not US-German midrange, it is not US-Britain ramp, it is US-Italy ramp. And it is full of a lot of one-ofs. This is a very odd deck. I know you brought US-Italy ramp to the last tournament, so maybe you want to go over the experience with that deck?
I'd rather not. I mean, my deck was built around curving out into California plus Mare Nostrum and trade. My ramp specifically built into that, and everybody brought commandos for whatever reason, and so California turns out not great into commandos. Luckily for Cappuccino, not facing a lot of commando decks here. A little more sketchy in the early game without 30 seconds. So not as easy of a time contesting the board early on, but with the war machines you can a little more consistently build into doing things. Although you don't really have any plays on turn 3 if you war machine, except for more ramp, which can be a little scary if you're playing against a Japan main.
Just hit your 1 Bologna regiment every time.
That's a good point, actually. No Jasko either. That's kind of absurd.
Yeah.
That's bravery right there.
I really love this card draw. The 2 Thunderbolts and the 1 USAAF Spitfire. I'm a huge fan of unit-based draw, rather than just running regular draw. He's actually running 2 mobilizations, 2 weakened duets, and war bonds on top of this Thunderbolt and Spitfire. So he does not want to run out of cards with this deck. I think with Italy Ally, there is a fine line you can walk where you basically just like don't even bother fighting for like the first 3 turns of the game, and just bank on the power of Mare Nostrum to bring you back. I think that's a possibility. I am generally a fan of just running a lot more anti-aggro stuff. I like to play it way more safe than this, but I think we'll have to see where this lines up, because with a deck with 3 Mare Nostrums and 3 Californias, you can never just say it's going to lose to aggro every time. Because if you hit the War Machine into Hour of Need, into California Mare Nostrum attack, heal 6, your deck can beat anything. And yeah, that's Cappuccino's last deck. So again, we actually have 2 aggros, the self-damage deck, which is kind of in the middle, and then 2 controls. So similar style decks as Vinny, however taken in very different directions. So actually, Cappuccino versus Vinny is our first game tomorrow. How are you feeling, based on what we've seen of their lineups?
I don't know. You say that like I'm supposed to have any clue how these matchups are supposed to go. I don't have experience with Brit Poland legions into US Italy ramp. Don't ask me.
I mean, that just shows you're not playing enough ladder. You're just a meta slave.
It'll be varied, and I think it will end up being close, with the loser having 3 or 4 wins, just
Yeah.
based off of how many variables are in here, the difficult matchups that you can find yourself in, the matchups that nobody has any idea what's going on, will
Yeah.
be will be a little bit of a clown fiesta.
I will be. I would genuinely be shocked if this game ended in anything less than 8 games. I would not be surprised if this went to 9 games. But yeah, I mean, some of these decks, like, even if you've played like 100 games of US Italy ramp on ladder, maybe once you queue into Britain Poland, and you can't just take that one game as a map for how the entire matchup's gonna go. Um, but I mean, I will say I'm curious if these players are going to get the chance to like practice with any friends or training partners these matchups, because even one game, it doesn't tell you how the matchup's going to play out every single time, but one game of experience against a deck you're not very familiar with is sometimes all you need. I remember there was one tournament I played against John PX playing a Britain Poland, a very very heavy Britain Poland control deck on ladder, like the day before the tournament. And I was playing, I think, a Soviet control, and the game went down to the wire. I won by like 1 health on fatigue. And the next day they announced deck list. I was playing John PX in the first round, and he was bringing that Britain Poland deck. I was bringing that same Soviet deck, and we got into that matchup game 1. And just based on the knowledge of how that game played out, just the previous day on ladder, I changed my play around a little bit and won much more convincingly. And I think very easily, if I'd not played that one game previously, I could have gone into that matchup not knowing exactly how to play and lost. So hopefully these players can get in some good training. And now let's look at Kolbasnik's decks. Kolbasnik, he, I believe he probably has the spiciest decks of the tournament. I think he's the only player to have 3 completely unique decks, not brought by any other player. Let me just... I'll bring up the first deck. It is a Britain-Japan Air, which is a combination we have not seen in a while. There we go. Yeah, and he's running 1 Burst of Fire, 1 Burning Sky, 1 Dawn operations. So,
One bomb.
yeah, the game is never over in a deck like this. Like with 2 Hurricanes and the Spitfire, and Finest Hour, this deck can easily OTK your opponent with like really only 4 cards, 3 or 4 cards. And then other than that, I mean, he has the 4 close air supports, the 6 1-cost British planes. He's lacking those Fiats, which I think you wouldn't really want to go up against like Britain, Italy. But, I mean, air superiority is so strong. I think this might be significantly better into self-damage than Britain, Italy, just because of the burst potential.
Do these people hate heresy?
That is true. This is... We only have 2 air decks, and neither of them have Piracy. That is wild. And also no Ultra. And
no, Ultra's not that crazy, but yeah.
Yeah, and no Research. I love Research, and I think especially if you're running a like Burst of Fire deck, just throw in Research. Sometimes it's like a slightly worse Convoy. Most of the times you go for Synthetic Rubber, and it's like the one card that wins you the game. But yeah, I'm very interested to see. Yes, it is Britain Air, but I mean, honestly, Britain Japan Air is a breath of fresh air. Pun not intended. Yeah, I'm interested to see how this plays out. Then we have another... Oh, actually, so I stand corrected. We do have 2 decks that have been brought by 3 times. This is the 3rd German-US Heinz deck. And this is looking much closer to your deck list, am I right? Well, at least closer than...
Yeah.
Oh,
The
actually,
difference being the 35Ts.
and the fast times.
Oh yeah, I didn't see that.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. This looks very similar to, I think it was Cappuccino's version of the deck.
Yeah, very close. Maybe there's somebody else who they got the list from.
Yeah, that is actually a possibility. Although I'm not sure how many like competitive circles Cappuccino and Kolbasnik share. I'd be very interested in that. I'm also now realizing that that Vinny is in fact not bringing German US. I think I put it in the wrong deck for Vinny. Vinny is actually bringing an Alpine deck, which I do not have the image for. Whoops. But anyways, let's just move on to Kolbasnik's deck. Deck
King. J King Productions.
Deck 3. This is not Japan aggro. This is Japan-France resistance. It has been a long time since we have seen this deck. And, I mean, how do you think it goes into self-damage? I can't say I've played this matchup into self-damage.
Oh, you lose on the spot. I mean, I don't know. The running less Vivs for, more defend depths helps, but it's not great. Because if you just having a 1k deal 1 damage to yourself, it just helps self-damage a lot of the time.
Something that's worth considering is he is running a grand total of 8 units in his deck. And basically none of them are units you're going to be playing at the beginning of the game. So self-damage's ability to actually pop off might be hindered quite a lot. You might not be seeing 6/6s hit the board quite as early.
Yeah, but you can also play a 6/6 for 4, and this deck is still not great into it in terms of like the Tora and naval operation sort of removal. Defend in depth, I think, is going to be the key card. That if they don't have like at least 2 defend in depths, I think it's just going to be a nightmare situation.
Alright, then we go on to his Soviet deck. He's the only player to have not brought Soviet self-damage. He has Soviet Italy control. I love this deck. He actually, if you saw my game on stream, or if you saw my stream yesterday, I made a Soviet Italy control deck, which I think is 1 card different than this. Maybe 2 cards different. Yeah?
Cascade fuck? No sickles?
Yeah, I'm also not... My Soviet Italy control deck is literally called No Sickles, question mark.
But it's so nuts. It's value.
Yeah, but in this meta of, like, SUs and 4, 5, 6s and Brittly Air, Jagro's, like, the one deck you want Sickles against. And other than that, you just want Red Dons.
Yeah, what about Alpine? What about when they play Gabokes Pioneer turn 1 idiot?
Then you Red Don it, and you're honestly happy? Yeah, this deck has a ton of healing available to it, and as a result, it harnesses these Red Dons in the early game. And then, yeah, you just run a lot of value cards. He is running By the Sword as well as 5-Year Plan, so he has a little bit more draw. He has the 1 copy of Partisan's Red Banner, which, personally, I run that just to deal with Leopolds. Just because if you can do Partisan's Red Banner on Leopold, you win the game. However, I think we only have 1 Leopold in the tournament. If even that. Yeah, I don't think there's... No, Vinny has Leopold in his Alpine deck. So the later parts of this deck might not work out super well, but, I mean, they're gonna be fine into the Britain-Poland or the US ramp decks.
Isn't Naval Brigade a little whack without sickles?
Yeah, but I mean, just like through trading down, um, you usually have damaged units. Also, it's sort of a necessity against like the Tiger IE. Dechi must help a little bit, but like, yeah, it's really good against the untargetable units that German control typically has. Unfortunately for him, there's no German control in this tournament. Well, at least no German control he's going to be playing against in this tournament. Yeah, I think this deck has pretty good potential into Wild Eyes. Wild Eyes is running the 5 aggro, uh, like the aggro mid-range decks. Like he certainly could get a winner or two against the Soviet deck, but I think the Soviet deck is favored in almost every matchup against Wild Eyes, except for maybe the Britain-Italy Air. But that's the other thing with the Red Dons, is 3 Red Dons, 252Ks, the 2 Yak 9s. This deck, the 3 Fiats as well, are really useful. This deck can do better into air than any previous Soviet control deck that has been built, so we'll have to see. Then we have his US deck. It is US-German, and this is my preferred style of US-German. It's a much more... we call it US-German mid-range, but this is a much more mid-range version of US-German than, for example, Wild Eyes' version with the double Blitzkrieg 3 Shermans. This has the 4 Shermans. It has 3 We Can Do It's and Medical Battalion. It's nice to see those cards returning now that combo's gone. And it's running Island Hopping and Research. Those are typically the cards you see instead of Blitzkriegs. Island Hopping is just so amazing. I love that card so much. It's weird to me to see the 22nd Infantries in this deck as well. But I guess just a little bit extra card draw. What do you think about this deck?
I think that's pretty tried and true. It might have a little bit of trouble in some matchups compared to the other deck, because if you run Blitzkrieg in your deck and you run into an unfavorable matchup, you can still win on turn 5. But if like they have a bad hand with this deck, if they have a bad hand, of course that's still good for you, but you still have to play out the game for a while until you can win it, which can give them a lot of opportunities. So
Yeah.
I think more consistent, less high roll.
Alright, and then that's actually his 5th deck. So he's got the Britain-Japan Air, the German-US Heinz, Japan-France Resistance, Soviet-Italy Control, and the US-German mid-range. How do you feel his chances are into Wild Eyes? These are more familiar decks, at the very least. Well, at least Wild Eyes' decks are more familiar.
It's hard to remember 10 decks, especially when we started with Wild Eyes. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess I kind of favor Kilbosnik a little bit. I don't know. Air superiority seems pretty good in every single matchup. That's nice. If Kilbosnik isn't running self-damage, is he?
No, he's running the Soviet Italy. He's the one player who's not running self-damage.
Okay. I favor Wild Eyes. I think that deck's nuts. I'll just ignore the 9 other decks and say self-damage pretty dang good and favor Wild Eyes.
Alright.
High-level analysis.
I want to say I think it's slightly favored towards Kolbasnik on deck lists. With the first one, Vinny versus Cappuccino, I think they have a lot of similar decks and a lot of decks that like we've never really seen operate before. And it's really going to depend on what decks play into what decks. I think Kolbasnik versus Wild Eyes, I see a lot of mirrors for like the aggro mid-range decks, and then 2 control decks, which I would just much rather be on the control than any of Wild Eyes' decks, if those matchups take place. So I do think Kolbastic might have a little bit of an advantage, but he does need to play his decks very well to press that advantage, because all of Wild Eyes' decks are capable of winning by, like, turn 6, against an opponent who doesn't know what he's doing. So, I will actually pull up Vinny's decks. I'm not going to have an image for it right now. By Vinny's deck, I mean Vinny's last deck, the Alpine deck, which I somehow messed up and sent the wrong deck in the picture. Let me pull up KARDS. Okay, well, once KARDS opens. Here we go. Gonna quickly look at Vinny's decks, and yeah, I think that's the only one of Vinny's decks that are wrong. So, scratch Vinny's US-German Heinz, or German-US Heinz, sorry, and instead he has this deck, which is a German-Italy Alpine. 2 dive bombings, typical Alpine cards. 2 dive bombings, 1 sudden strike, circlements, 1 Reichsbank. What? How do you feel about Reichsbank and Alpine?
Does he run Leopold?
1 Flampanzer, 1 Eastern Front Band, 1 Obice, 1 Martyr, double Enigma, and then 3 copies of 7th Alpini, Schwalbe, Leopold, Jagdbomber.
Oh,
wow, this is spicy. I
think he was anticipating more air to have Bank and Schwalbe.
I'm very, very confused why he's running 2 Enigmas with 3 copies of 7th Alpini. I'm not gonna lie.
Because he has Bank.
He has 1 Bank?
That's 2 credits.
Yeah. I mean, against a deck that doesn't run a ton of retreat, this Bank seems actually really good. So if you play like an Alpine on 1, Alpine on 2, maybe your opponent removes one of them, you play Bank on 3, and then on turn 4 you play like 2 more Alpines and a 7th Alpini, and you slam down like a 7/10 Mary Nostrum guard. If your opponent doesn't retreat that, you win the game. Obviously, though, a whole lot of things need to line up for that to happen. And then, like, bank into, like, a ton of Alpine, or bank into Leopold, bank into Schwalbe in certain matchups is fine. Honestly, with 2 Enigmas, I think I would have liked to have seen 2 banks.
I like so you can have 2 banks, but 1 bank is enough to incite the fear of God into your opponent, and that's obviously the main point, right?
But I feel like
at any point next turn, could be Leopold coming down, could be Schwalbe.
But it's only the fear of God if you play bank.
I look at the deck list, I'm like, oh my god, he put in bank because he's a high roller and I can't play around anything.
Yeah, well, that is Vinny's Alpine deck. Yeah, I feel like you're just not afraid of bank, because it's like, at any given point, your opponent can waste their entire turn playing bank, and then play Leopold the next turn. And it's like, that's just not something you need to consider playing around until they play the bank. But, yeah, I mean, I don't think the deck is bad. I personally would not have used my Italy ally slot on that deck. Like, with the ability to only bring 1 Italy ally, Alpine is just not the one I would have gone for. Like, even with German main, German Italy control would be a good choice. However, Vinny might have expected a lot more German Italy controls from other players, because I think Alpine's actually decent into German Italy. They don't have a ways to deal with the 3 credit cards.
Yeah, anything that's sort of slow and dirtily just gets rolled over by Alpine pretty quick.
So yeah, maybe maybe this is a meta call. Um, its win rate against, I think, Heinz, and, well, you can certainly add more to this about Heinz, but its win rate against US mid-range, at the very least, is very dependent on, like, turns 1 to 3. It's like, going first is usually really, really important, especially in the US mid-range. Like, if you have turn 1 infantry into 35T kill their Alpine, you just win the game. But if you go second, they play turn 1 Geburgs Pioneer into turn 2, 2 more Alpines, and you miss your infantry into 35T, you're just going to get hard crushed.
It doesn't matter if you miss your infantry into 35T, you lose that anyways.
Yeah. I mean, he's going against. If I was Vinny, I would be so scared of getting this into the Poland Legions deck. Just with the amount of retreat in there, I feel like Alpine is pretty vulnerable to retreat effects. Like Churchill coming down is just gonna mess this deck up.
I do enjoy the analysis of go first and have a good hand, idiot. Pretty good strategy.
But yeah, overall, I'm very excited. I think it's still very up in the air. Anyone can win this. And yeah, we have two different strategies. And we kind of have the two different strategies. Well, maybe two is too few. I feel like Vinny and Cappuccino have very similar lineups, whereas Wild Eyes and Kolbasnik have very different ones. Yeah, is there anything else you want to add? Whether about the decks, the players, the event? Yourself? Your thoughts on the world? I don't know.
I think I would have won, but Jaking thought I was too good to put me in, so now I'm stuck casting. Unlucky.
True. Here's a question. Well, you sort of answered this at the beginning of the stream, but if you could bring 5 decks, like if you were playing in this event, would you bring just the 5 meta decks you highlighted at the beginning?
Yeah, well, I mean, 4 of them are meta decks, and one of them is
like a weird US deck.
I'd do US Pole with what's the card that's 2k
Unity is strength?
Yeah, I'd play Unity Strength US Poland. I've seen that deck ravage me on ladder before. So I feel like, I don't know, it seems pretty good. I haven't played it personally, but
yeah,
US mid-range, but I mean, they had to nerf a card for it, and they didn't nerf it that hard. So
I mean, I feel like it also, they nerfed Kali, maybe not necessarily specifically for it, but the nerf to Kali was really big hit to that deck, I think. Yeah, I think if I was in this, it's really hard to come up with a lineup like on the spot because you have to think about so many different factors.
well, you could consider how my lineup is nuts, and then say that.
I don't think. I think I would have brought in Soviet Britain control. Well, Soviet Japan. It's because you're not using the Japan ally for literally anything else. So it's like it's like, why would you not bring just a number 1 meta deck that like does not restrict you at all in any other way? So yeah, I probably would have brought self damage. Britain, US, I think. German, Italy. Like Britain, US ramp. German, Italy control. Japan, German aggro. And then US. Maybe US France. Maybe US Britain. Yeah, I would have brought more control decks just because if I'm playing a best of 9, I want to be playing control, not aggro.
Because you want the stream to go on for 18 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Personally, I feel like it's less tilting to lose on control if you don't have to play the deck immediately again.
If you were in this tournament, I think you'd be doing the math on how to bring 5 fatigue decks.
Yeah, if somebody invited me to a best of 9, I would definitely just bring like the 5 slowest decks possible. and then just like think to the rope every turn. Wait, don't my opponents just literally leave the tournament out of frustration? But yeah.
I'm not spending 4 hours for a $50 prize pool in an invitational, you bastard.
It's actually up to $100 prize pool now.
Yeah.
But yeah, remember to tune in tomorrow, everybody. We have 15 codes to give away. So yeah, there'll be more information about how to enter the giveaway tomorrow, but show up tomorrow, 9 a.m. EST. Yeah, Berto and myself will be there. And
3 codes for each viewer?
And that is the end of the deck analysis part. So now we can be... That's why I'm going to clip the YouTube video to make it look better. Now we can just talk about whatever. Yeah, I'd be down. First, I'm going to just test a couple of the different screens, just to make sure they... 27 back-to-back 90-minute fatigue games. I don't think there is time in the day. 24-hour, my first 24-hour live stream will just be me hosting a 4-man tournament. So let's... Oh geez, did the... Okay. Just testing out some screens. Don't mind this at the moment. OBS screen share decided to have a stroke. Okay, this... There we go. So we have the mulligan hand. The opponent's side will be blurry. I can't really change anything about that. So let's just do mulligans. Then, once mulligans are done, switch to the in-game.
Enhance image.
Yeah, you can... This is how the game's gonna go down. I'm gonna get access to the spectator mode. Yeah, this is basically how the game's gonna go down, and then once one of the players loses, we go to this screen where can edit the score and put in tiny little check marks.
Not really
on the decks that won.
Bosnick bias here.
Cool. Yeah, that's basically... I think that all worked out fairly well. There will almost certainly be difficulties during the stream trying to keep track of all of this live, but yeah.